Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
What view did you take of this fight, the Tata Mistry fight?
I didn't think it was as simplistic as made out by the pink press. There were a lot of details which were missing. And I really, I don't feel, people often ask me because I'm a Parsi, so who was right and who was wrong? And I don't think necessarily there was a right and a wrong. You know, as I pointed out in the book, one thing, and people used to say that Parsi is such a lovely community. Why are they fighting like this with each other? And the most horrified of all were the Parsis, because they had invested in the Tata, and their shares had fallen by some 10%. And they said, what is this man doing, Cyrus Mistry? Because his shares, family shares were huge. But I wanted to put things in, I think all of them believed they were fighting for what they believed in.
Yeah.
So, and it took a heavy toll from all three of them. So, and somewhere along the line, when I was doing the story, I talked to some business journalists, and they said, why on earth are you getting into this? You know? And then I realized that here are people who file criminal defamation suits for rupees 3,000. So I did get scared.
Tell us a little bit, take us behind the story, because you know that behind every corporate issue, there are family issues, and among the Parsis, there are generational issues. Because these are also Parsi dynasties, famous Parsi dynasties. So how did Shapurji Palanji became such sizable shareholders in the Tata Group?
Well, actually, I found out while researching on the story that what was coming out regularly as gospel truth in the pink papers was not correct. They said that Shapurji Palanji got his shares from F.E. Dinshaw, which is another Parsi character of the early 20th century and 19th century. But when I researched it, and Mr. Mistry was very candid, he said, but we bought them in the 60s and the 70s with the consent of the Tatas. So business journalist friends refused to believe the story. And then I showed them the affidavit which the Tatas have made when the matter came in the company law board, before the company law board, which shows very clearly that in fact the shares were bought in the 60s and with the consent of Mr. J.R.D. Tata. First lot to J.R.D.'s widowed sister Rodabe, second lot to Ratan Tata Trust, which is a bit surprising. Why should the trust want to sell some of them? You must realize that Tata Sons was a wholly Parsi-owned company. It had only one non-Parsi holder, one share.
Who was there?
It was the Maharaja of Chote Udaipur. I don't know how he got there, but otherwise they were not. It was a family-controlled thing, basically. Right. They must have trusted. So there was, and the third lot of shares, that's the one which created the problem. The third lot was sold by J.R.D. Tata's younger brother, Darav, behind his back. The other two were the approval of J.R.D. It was sold to Shapurji Palanji. It turned out that what happened was in 1969, the Monopoly and Restrictive Trade Practices Act was passed. That meant that managing agencies had come to an end.
That was the infamous MRTPC, which was later shut down as part of the post-91 reform.
That's right. So as a result of that, the Tatas were no longer in control of the empire because they never owned 50% of the shares of their companies. In some cases, like Tata Steel, I think it was 11-12% of their shares. So they had become vulnerable. J.R.D. always realized this. So the power of his personality and his connections held the group together. I think when Ratan came, he realized that he must do something to keep control. Now, why? Because the trusts do own 66% of the company, so that shouldn't have been a problem. But there was a problem because there's a section 135A which says very clearly that for charities, charitable trusts, you can't vote directly. if you own shares, you has to be done through a government nominee. That made them very vulnerable. So ironically, this section was amended so quietly that nobody knew about it. It was during Mr. Vajpayee's time as Prime Minister. And who was it done by? It was done by Nasli Wadia, who was a very good friend of Ratan Tata, a very good friend of the Vajpayee administration. As you see in the book, he was friendly. Nobody knows just how close he was to the old BJP.
So what is it that makes Parsis so different, so distinctive, so successful in whatever they do? Is it the community spirit? Is it something else? What is it?
I don't think there's one factor, but I think Parsis are brought up to do their duty, and they really do ingrain in you the sense of ethics and also hard work. And they have a little natural talent and enterprise. You know, a lot of people I met for this book bemoan the fact, they said, oh, that enterprise was in the old days when we were a migrant community. Now there's no enterprise left in the community. People in Bombay feel safe. They've got these houses which are subsidized, you know, the Bagh, the famous Baghs of Bombay. So that enterprise is not there. The late Jamshid Kanga told me this. He said, do you ever find a Parsi taking, there were so many, they made such a name for themselves in the army, in the Air Force, in the civil services. And now you hardly see a soul in them. And why? Because these Parsis now go in for law and for corporate affairs because they're safe and they don't want to move from Bombay. But I don't think the spirit of, my feeling was that the spirit of enterprise has certainly not died. Mr. Poonawalla being one example. He's a late 20th century billionaire. And if you take others, I mean, recently, for example, there's the success story of Theo Brahma. Right. Here's a young girl who was a cook in Oberoi. She started on a shoestring. And in 15 years, she has 50 outlets. She's become a multi-million company.
The most famous Parsis of all times. And then after that, I will ask you, how did the Parsis acquire the name Bawas and why? So first, most famous Parsis of all times.
That's a tough one. Most famous Parsi of all time. If I say it, most Parsis will jump down my throat. But if you take internationally the most famous Parsi, it's Freddie Mercury. But the irony is that very few people know that he's a Parsi at all.
Yes, in fact, even I wasn't conscious. I mean, if you had asked me, I would have said probably yes, but I wasn't conscious that he is a Parsi.
I mean, he's been voted in all the lists of one of the greatest singers ever, the greatest individual ever, even in Japan and places like that. His songs like Bohemian Rhapsody and Barcelona, it's timeless.
So tell us a little about him as a Parsi.
You know, in the book, when I referred to him, I compared him with another great Parsi musician, Zubin Mehta.
Right.
And the difference, the irony of the differences, you know, they both came from middle-class Parsi families. And I think really the great achievers in the Parsis are not these plutocrats, but the middle class. But where Zubin was loved by the community. Every time he came for a concert, Apro Zubin, which means in Gujarati, Awa Zubin. And Zubin never gave up his Indian passport. Zubin kept coming to India, even acted as an informal, you know, intermediary with countries like Israel. Now, Freddie, on the other hand, never mentioned the fact that he was Parsi. His name was changed, which is normal.
From where does the name Bawa come? And how is it?
The Bawa is a Gujarati name. They used to call them Bawajis. Some people say it's derogatory, but I don't think it is. It's just Gujarati form of one word to, it's a form of affection for Parsis.
Yeah.
Baba
So
Jiche.
you don't see it as derogatory at all.
Not at all. My cousin said, why did you put Baba? I don't think it's the right word.
Yeah, because you use it in your title and other Babas.
Yes, because one had to think about the title. I was on a walk. I had originally thought I'd have the thing a conventional title like, from Silk Routes or China trade to the Tatas. But then when I thought about, my walking companion, Vinay Sitapati, in fact, said that the worst possible name. And when the publisher suggested an intimate history of the Parsis, that I agreed, and my fellow journalists who happened to be in Goa there with me said that's a terrible name. They all came up with names. And then I said, I do want the name Tata somewhere because they are the most prominent business family and they are equally as well known as Freddie Mercury, perhaps. So then somebody suggested, I think it was Vinay who said, you put Freddie Mercury. Now his brother happens to be some whiz in, what is this, marketing?
FMCG, yes. He's just now become CEO of
so he referred
big Godrej companies, which is a Parsi.
Yes, I read that after that. And he said that that's fine with the title. I mean, Vinay was sweet enough to do that. I'm fine with the title, but you should add another one because there are too many books on the Tatas. So I said, fine. And I thought the right one is Freddie Mercury because he is the best known Parsi. I mean, most Parsis will be shocked for him to be included in a title. And that's how the name came about.
All of us are confined to eating one egg a day. But, can you
that is the famous case of Rusi Modi. Yes. Yeah. He ate a 12-egg omelette for breakfast. And they all are lovers of good food.
Yeah, all are lovers. We know one in Delhi.
And they may go all over the world and eat the most fancy Western cuisine, but they love their Parsi food as well. Because Parsi cuisine is a very remarkable cuisine. It's a fusion cuisine of Persia, the spices of India, Goa, Maharashtra, Gujarat, all mixed up. In fact, I asked Nasli Wadia, I said, but how did you consider yourself a Parsi? So I've always been a Parsi. My customs are Parsi. My food is Parsi.
Yeah. So we know one like that in Delhi. That's Ryan Karanjawala. He loves food also.
Yeah. Jiji Boy Dadaji, who's considered the father of the Industrial Revolution in Bombay. But so he's a Parsi because what are Parsis? Most outsiders don't know what is the difference between a Parsi and a Zoroastrian.
Even I don't know.
Okay, then I'll explain to you. A Parsi is someone who is descended from the people who arrived from Persia because they were being persecuted by the Arabs. So, people believe around the 8th century, maybe some came later, but their descendants are known as Parsis from the word Pars in Persia. They were generally known as Pars. So all of them were Zoroastrians, of course, because they're following the Zoroastrian religion, which was replaced by the Islamic religion in Persia. Now, the question is, so anyone can belong to a religion, surely, but the Parsis are unique. They said that in our religious institutions, only Parsis will be allowed. Parsis or people from Iran, whom we accept are Zoroastrian. But any Johnny-come-latelys, we are not taking in. We are not also taking the children of Parsi women who marry outside. They will accept the men, the children of the men who marry outside. Very patriarchal. I'm told by some that it's because of the Sassanid tradition was patriarchal. I don't know. But there's a lot of call for reform because, as we said, the population was so low. It is even lower because, first and foremost, it is the mother who usually passes on the religion and the traditions to the children. And secondly, why should you discriminate? So there's a big fight in the community between liberals and conservatives on this issue of whether Parsis who marry out of the religion, their children should be allowed into the fold. Some priests do their ceremony. Then others say that they're rebels and renegades. This goes on.
Parsi women have also had a history of being rebellious. Probably the most famous Parsi woman in India's history. Will you name her?
Well, there's no need to name her, so well known. Bikaiji Cama.
Yeah.
Spelled with a K and an H, which the government of India still does not realize.
Yes, yes. Yeah. And tell us about her.
Well, I think she was remarkably brave for her time, remarkably progressive for her times. And she got herself ostracized by her own community. She left her husband. She went to London. She was secretary first for Dadabhai Naoroji. Now, in history books, she is best known for the fact that she unfurled the model of the Indian flag back in 2006 in Germany.
1906.
1906, sorry. Yeah. 1906, back in Germany. But people forget another aspect of her. She left Dadabhai Naoroji and she became an ardent follower of Savarkar.
Oh. Vinayak
Damodar Savarkar. And not only did she become it, she fully supported his cause. And she didn't have that much money because though she came from a very wealthy family, they had finally cut her off. So she had her jewelry. And according to some of her husband's family, she also had a letter from the bank which they had sent her with, which she used for years. But whatever it is, she used to subsidize all these, the non-violent, violent people who were part of the freedom struggle, but they did not want it the conventional way. She subsidized them for years. So she finally took the blame for Savarkar when he was accused in that Nasik conspiracy case. She says, no, I was responsible for smuggling those pistols to India. And you will notice that that is one minority community which Savarkar was always very fond of, was the Parsis. I think we owe that partly to Madam Khan.
I told you I have a fan club for you in my office. So Amrita Datta wants to know, despite their influence, Parsi eateries, they used to be the most famous ones in Mumbai, they are in decline. Why so?
Well, I think they were run by, most of those Parsi eateries are not usually run by Parsis as such, if you're very technical about the matter, but Iranis, who came later to India in the end of the 19th century, 20th century. I think the families have declined, as all Parsi populations have declined. So they've just, after the older generation passed away, that they haven't continued that. I don't think they were ever very paying propositions because they were never very money-minded, but there were such lovely places. There still are some left. 100 years ago, less than 100 years ago, if a Parsi woman tried to marry out, I mean, it was considered, it may be so in Hindus also, but I don't know, it was considered a disgrace for the whole family. When my sister for the first one in the family to marry out, my grandfather had such a fit, he wept and was inconsolable. So because of that, Parsi women don't want to offend often. They give up. In the book, I mentioned to several cases of even men who have given up because they didn't want to offend. The result is that you have a lot of spinsters also in the Parsi religion, much higher, I think, than the national average.
Because they couldn't marry the person they wanted
to marry.
Yeah.
So and they were loyal to their families.
Yeah.
And family beliefs.